The coffee mug wasn't where Ethan left it, 3 inches to the right. Small thing, most people wouldn't notice. Most people weren't trained to notice. He stood in his kitchen, staring at the white ceramic cup, feeling the familiar cold weight settle in his chest. Someone had been in his cabin. Someone good. Ethan Cole had spent 12 years in military intelligence before the burnout drove him to the Montana wilderness. He'd tracked terrorist cells through digital shadows and analyzed threat patterns that saved thousands of lives. Now he lived alone, 30 miles from the nearest town, supposedly finding peace in isolation. But peace was a lie, he told himself. The truth was simpler. He was hiding. Not anymore. He picked up the mug with careful fingers, examining the surface. No prints, no trace. Professional? He checked the window locks. Undisturbed. The door sensor he'd hidden in the frame showed no tampering, yet someone had been inside. Someone who could bypass his security without leaving evidence. Over the next week, Ethan noticed more signs. A book spine facing the wrong direction. Floorboards that creaked in patterns slightly different from his own weight distribution. The faintest scratch on his back door lock, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Each anomaly was subtle, precise, deliberate. He began his counter-surveillance on day 8. Nothing obvious. He maintained his routine perfectly. Morning runs, afternoon reading, evening cooking, but he added layers beneath the surface. Microscopic fibers across doorways, pressure sensors under rugs, cameras disguised as smoke detectors, recording in infrared. On day 12, he caught his first real evidence. The thermal camera showed a heat signature outside his window at 3 in the morning. The shape was wrong. Human proportions, but the heat distribution didn't match. Cooler core temperature, unusual muscular structure. The figure stood motionless for 17 minutes, watching him sleep, then vanished into the forest without disturbing a single branch. Ethan's blood ran cold, but his mind stayed sharp. Not human. The implications crashed over him like ice water. First contact, and whatever had found him wasn't here for diplomacy. He spent the next month studying his stalker. She was patient, disciplined. She circled his property in irregular patterns, never repeating the same approach twice. She tested his perimeter, probing for weaknesses, learning his habits. The behavior reminded him of apex predators he'd studied. Wolves, bears, big cats. But this was something else. This was intelligence combined with predatory instinct. Ethan pretended ignorance. Each morning he followed his routine. He chopped wood. He read books on the porch. He drove to town every Friday for supplies. But in the spaces between, he worked. He mapped every appearance, every movement pattern, every second of footage. He built a profile. His stalker was female. He confirmed that through enhanced imaging on day 43. She stood roughly 6.5 feet tall, with elongated limbs and a build that suggested both strength and speed. Her technology was extraordinary, some kind of adaptive camouflage that bent light around her body. Weapons he couldn't fully identify. Sensors that let her track him through walls, but she had patterns. Everyone did. She preferred high ground for observation. She moved during weather changes when atmospheric pressure masked her approach. She was right-handed. She favored his western perimeter, probably because the terrain offered better cover. And she was enjoying this. Ethan saw it in the way she lingered, the way she circled closer each week. She wasn't just hunting, she was savoring. This was a game to her. He was prey and she was giving him time to run, to panic, to make the chase interesting. She had no idea he was building a cage around her. By month 3, Ethan had transformed his cabin into a tactical maze. Tripwires connected to motion sensors, directional sound emitters, infrared strobes positioned to blind her sensors. He studied her technology through stolen glimpses and reverse-engineered counters with human ingenuity and hardware store supplies. He learned she relied heavily on her camouflage. That meant she'd grown dependent on it, confident in its superiority. Weakness. He learned her weapons operated on an energy signature his equipment could detect with the right modifications. Another weakness. She was strong, fast, technologically advanced, but she'd never fought an enemy who knew she was coming. Month 4 brought the first test. Ethan staged a scenario, left his cabin door unlocked, lights on, truck running. He hid in the forest with a thermal scanner and watched her approach. She moved like liquid shadow, confident and sleek. She entered his cabin, searched it with methodical precision, and left without disturbing anything beyond his notice threshold. But Ethan had marked her, a microscopic tracker, hidden in dust particles he'd aerosolized throughout the cabin. Human tech, crude but effective. Now he could monitor her location within a 2-mile radius. She returned to a cave system 7 miles north. He noted the location and smiled. She had a base. That meant she was committed. This wasn't a scouting mission. She intended to finish what she'd started. Good. So did he. Month 5 changed everything. The alien grew bolder. She no longer just watched, she started leaving signs. A claw mark on his truck, a dead deer arranged outside his door, killed with precision that suggested ritual. She was escalating, building towards something. Ethan matched her escalation with preparation. He reinforced his defenses, built redundancies into his traps, studied human military history, not for advanced tactics, but for brutal simplicity. High-tech could be countered with high-tech, but sometimes the oldest tricks worked best. He acquired supplies, quietly. Thermite, ball bearings, industrial magnets, compressed air tanks, chain. Nothing illegal, nothing that would draw attention. Just tools. On day 163, the storm came. Weather reports predicted a massive cold front, with lightning and wind that would hammer the region for hours. Perfect conditions for a predator who used atmospheric cover. Ethan knew she'd make her move. He prepared his cabin like a stage, lights on inside creating the illusion of normalcy. His truck parked at an angle, blocking the eastern approach, funneling her toward the west entrance. He left the back door unlocked, bait too tempting to resist. Then he waited in the basement, watching his monitors, heart steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. 12 years of intelligence work had taught him patience. 6 months of being hunted had taught him rage. Tonight, both would serve him. The storm hit at 9. By 9:30, his motion sensors pinged. Western perimeter. She was coming. Ethan watched her approach on infrared. She moved through the storm like it didn't exist, her form flickering in and out of his sensors. She'd evolved her camouflage, adapting to his detection methods. Impressive. But she didn't know he'd evolved to. She circled the cabin twice, confirming his location through some kind of bioscanner. He prepared for that. Heated mannequins positioned throughout the cabin, radiating human temperature signatures. False targets. She took the bait. The back door opened silently. Ethan watched her enter, a ghost in his home. She moved through the kitchen, living room toward the bedroom, where his primary heat signature pulsed. He triggered the first trap. Magnetic locks slammed down on every window and door, reinforced steel buried in the frames months ago. She spun, assessing, her camouflage flickering. He triggered the second trap. Infrared strobes flooded the cabin, overwhelming her sensors, forcing her camouflage offline. For the first time, Ethan saw her clearly. She was magnificent and terrifying. Sleek armor covered her body, organic and technological merged. Her face was angular, predatory, with eyes that burned amber in the strobe light. 4-fingered hands gripped weapons that hummed with lethal energy, and she was looking directly at the camera. At him. Ethan spoke through the intercom, his voice calm. "I've been waiting for you." Her head tilted. She understood English. Good. He wanted her to understand what came next. 6 months, he continued. "You've been tracking me for 6 months. You thought I didn't know. You thought I was easy prey." She moved toward the basement door. He triggered Trap 3. Compressed air jets blasted from the walls, throwing her off balance. Before she could recover, weighted nets, simple, crude, mechanical, dropped from the ceiling. She tore through them with inhuman strength, but they bought him seconds. Seconds were enough. Ethan emerged from the basement, not through the door she expected, but through a hidden panel in the living room floor. He'd spent 2 months building the secondary exit. He wore a homemade exosuit, not alien tech, just hydraulics and steel plating, built from salvaged construction equipment. It wouldn't make him her equal, but it would close the gap. She spun to face him, weapons raised. He dove behind the kitchen counter as energy blasts vaporized the wood where he'd stood. The shots were precise, controlled. She still thought she was the hunter. You made mistakes, Ethan called out, moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency. You relied on your technology. You got comfortable. You forgot the first rule of hunting. Another blast. She was tracking him by sound now. Her sensors still scrambled. He triggered Trap 4. Ball bearings, thousands of them, released from ceiling compartments. They rained down like metal hail, turning the floor into an unpredictable skating rink. She stumbled, just slightly, just enough. Ethan struck. He came around the corner low, using the exosuit's strength to drive a pneumatic spike toward her midsection. She blocked it with impossible speed, but the impact drove her backward into the western wall, exactly where he needed her. Trap 5 activated. The wall section collapsed, revealing a cage he'd built behind the drywall. Chain link reinforced with steel bars. She caught herself before falling in, but the momentary distraction cost her. Ethan hit her with the thermite charge. Not directly. He wasn't trying to kill her, just eliminate her advantages. The intense heat melted her weapons, fused her armor's technological components. She roared in fury and pain, a sound that raised every hair on his body. Then she came at him with pure physical force. The alien was stronger, faster. Her claws tore through his exosuit like paper, sparks flying as hydraulics failed. But Ethan had fought stronger opponents before. He'd survived insurgents, close-quarters combat, situations where technology failed and only will mattered. He used the environment, kicked the ball bearings toward her feet, making her adjust balance, threw furniture to force her into predictable movements, led her on a path he'd walked 1,000 times in preparation. She caught him in the hallway, her claws wrapping around his throat, lifting him off the ground. Her amber eyes burned with triumph. The hunt was over. Ethan smiled through the choking pressure. He'd planned for this too. His hand found the detonator in his belt. He triggered Trap 6. The floor beneath them collapsed, not into the basement, but into a pit he'd spent 3 months digging and reinforcing. They fell 12 feet onto a metal grate. The impact broke her grip. Ethan rolled free, gasping. The alien recovered first, rising to her feet in the darkness. But Ethan had night vision built into his damaged helmet. He saw her scanning the pit, searching for an exit. There wasn't one. Every wall was steel-reinforced concrete. The only opening was 15 feet above, too high even for her to jump. The first rule of hunting, Ethan said, his voice rough but steady, is to know the difference between predator and prey. She hissed at him, circling in the confined space. Her armor was damaged, weapons destroyed, but she was still dangerous. Still deadly. You spent 6 months studying me, Ethan continued, staying out of her range. You learned my patterns, my routine, my weaknesses, but you never asked the important question. He activated the final trap. Compressed air vents flooded the pit with a sedative gas. Something he'd acquired through carefully cultivated contacts, modified for higher-than-human dosage based on her respiratory patterns he'd studied for months. Why would someone with my training live alone in the wilderness? Why would I isolate myself so completely? Ethan watched her movements slow, her body fighting the chemical assault. You thought I was hiding from the world. She collapsed to one knee, still trying to reach him. I wasn't hiding from the world, he said quietly. I was waiting for something worth fighting. The alien Huntress fell unconscious. Ethan stood over her, breathing hard, pain radiating from a dozen wounds. He'd won. Not through superior strength or technology. Through patience. Through understanding that the best defense against a predator was to become something they didn't expect. A strategist. A trapmaker, a hunter who understood that sometimes the prey was deadlier than the predator. He climbed out of the pit using the rope ladder he'd hidden in the shadows. Above, the storm still raged. His cabin was destroyed. His life would never be the same. The government would come. Questions would follow. The world would change, knowing humanity wasn't alone. But right now, in this moment, Ethan Cole allowed himself a grim smile. The alien had come hunting for a human. She'd found one, and she'd learned what that really meant. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology, wasn't strength. It was adaptation, the ability to learn, prepare, and turn every disadvantage into a carefully planned advantage. The Huntress had tracked him for 6 months, and for 6 months, Ethan had been tracking her right back, building, planning, waiting. In the universe's grand hierarchy of predators, humans had just proven they belonged at the top, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were the most patient, the most creative, the most willing to do whatever it took to survive. Ethan looked down at his unconscious prisoner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he'd proven something important, something the universe needed to know. Earth's apex predator wasn't an animal, it was human. And humans were patient, persistent, and absolutely terrifying when threatened. The Huntress had come seeking glory. She'd found something else entirely. She'd found humanity, and humanity fought back.